Hi, I'm Sandy from Spitfire's support team, and I'm here to explain the Kickstart interface used in Hans Zimmer Percussion for anyone who's never used it before, or if you've used one of our other Kickstart libraries and you just want a quick refresher. I'll explain how to find your way around, how to map a sound to your keyboard and configure it, and the various settings and controls that are available. First, let's open up the main patch, which is Hans Zimmer Percussion.nki. This is the instrument that has all of our various instruments loaded and mapped across the keyboard. Now, what we see in front of us here is the Spitfire Kickstart interface, which can be divided up into three sections. We have the options and controllers on the left-hand side here. This section in the middle here is the instrument grid, or instrument area, and clicking on an instrument will bring up the list of hits and techniques on the right-hand side, as well as the name of the selected instrument. And this is where you can configure those techniques and map them. Before I get into more detail with this though, I just want to give a couple of quick tips for navigating around. First off, you'll see that the keyboard in Kontakt is multicolored, and these different colored ranges correspond to the various instruments in the instrument grid. So this blue range here is the taiko drums, and so on and so forth. If you're having trouble figuring out which of these sounds you're triggering on the grid, you can click on the name in the top right hand corner here, and it will go yellow. And now whenever you play a note, the instrument grid will change to reflect the last played instrument, and the list of hits and techniques on the right hand side will expand the last technique that you played. Now, to go into a little bit more detail, what I'm going to do is I'm going to load up the unmapped patch. So if I go into our presets folder here and go to Hans Zimmer Percussion Unmapped, this is essentially the same patch that we just had open, only none of the instruments have been mapped to the keyboard, so we can do that ourselves. So I'm going to go ahead and load up the taiko, and that will display our list of hits and techniques. And then all you need to do is simply choose the hit you want. So I'm going to go for ensemble hit, and then we get a little helpful bubble here that will tell us that we can play a key or click a key on Kontakt, and that will be mapped now. So if I play this note, you can see it's been mapped to two different notes on the keyboard. If I click the little cog icon on ensemble hit, that will expand and show me the various configuration options, and you can see that two finger mapping is enabled here. So if I uncheck that, you'll see just one key. It's fairly self-explanatory. It's quite handy for flams and rolls if you want to perform those instead of using the ones we've recorded. Underneath that, you'll see the checkbox for round robins. Pretty much everything on this library has 9 different round robins per dynamic layer. Unchecking that will mean you only hear the first round robin, and dragging the number up and down will change the number of them that you hear. If you drag it above 9, it will just jump back down to 9, of course. This can be handy if you've got limited resources on your computer. Say you're working on a demo on a laptop that only has 4 gig of RAM or something like that. Now, next to the cog icon, we also have the microchip, and that allows us to unload or load the particular hit or technique to memory. This also deletes the mapping from the Kontakt keyboard. Finally, if you're not happy with your mapping, say I've got a high roll here and I put that on this G, and I'm not happy with that, I can click and drag that down onto the E. And if I'm just not happy at all, I can click on that microchip to unload it completely. Now, looking over on the left-hand side, we have our options and controllers where we can alter the sound further. Our options are all checkboxes, our controllers are all faders. So the checkboxes in options are purge unused. This will unload from memory any samples that we're not using. So as I uncheck that, you can see it loads everything and it takes up quite a lot of memory. And clicking it means we only get those couple of taiko hits and rolls. CC-based velocity means that the dynamic layer will be controlled by CC1 or the mod wheel. This means that if you don't have a velocity-sensitive keyboard, you can control the dynamic layer with automation, or if you prefer to just have tighter control over the dynamics of your rolls, for instance. The other two checkboxes here are for resetting the round robin, either with key switches, which can be clicked and dragged. When it's enabled, you'll see a little red key moving up and down. Pressing that key will reset the round robins back to round robin number 1. And reset on transport means that every time you hit play in your DAW or sequencer, you will go back to number 1 as well, which means every time you play back the sequenced MIDI, you will hear exactly the same thing, which is very handy. Underneath our options, we have the controllers. Anyone who's used a Spitfire library before will be familiar with dynamics and expression. Dynamics being the control over which of the dynamic layers you're hearing, and expression being a more straightforward volume. Releases is quite specific to rolls in this library. So if I play the roll with the default releases, which is set to full, you'll hear the room decaying naturally as it did on the recording. If I turn that right down, you'll hear it dies away much quicker. It sounds a little unnatural, but it can be handy in much faster passages where you need a really tight, short release, or if you just don't want to have that room sound on the close mic. We also have response here. Now what response does is that will turn up the volume of the lowest dynamic layer to the same volume as the highest when it's turned all the way down. So with response turned all the way down, playing at a low velocity will have the same volume but a different dynamic layer, and with it turned all the way up, your low velocity will also be quieter, and your high velocity will be as loud as it can be. Underneath your controllers, we have our boom and crack, which if you've used any of the other Hans Zimmer libraries, like Hans Zimmer Piano, you'll know that these are just a low-pass filter for boom and a high-pass filter for crack. Quite handy for taming the sound a little bit and making it sit a bit better in your mix. And finally, we have our microphone mixer at the bottom here. Usually we have our close, tree and ambient mics, but for the Hans Zimmer Percussion, this is close, room and surround. Again, you have the microchips for unloading them and faders for mixing them. Finally, you have these small icons in here, which are pretty typical of all of our libraries. You have our velocity response, where you can select different velocity responses. This is the per articulation mixing button, which when it's unchecked and you have the two circles unlinked, means that the changes you make in the mixer will be specific to the instrument. With it checked, these changes will be global. You can also select multiple instruments by holding down Command or Control on Windows. And with that unlinked, these changes will affect this entire top row. Finally, we have the stereo width controls and a little floppy disk for saving our mix settings and loading them again, or copying them into a different instance of Kontakt. Anyway, I hope this video has been helpful to you. If you've got any further questions, it's always worth having a look at our manuals, which are on the product page itself, under Key Stats. And if you've got any questions following that, don't hesitate to get in touch with us at spitfireaudio.com/support. Thanks for watching.